If we can use it from an educational point of view, put it in schools. I think that what I'm saying is reasonably good for high school students, science classes. Let's get it out there. Let's put it on CDs if we need to and send it to people, videos.
Sure. Well, I'm available to
I'm
help,
available to it.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. So, so now we've spoken about the different kinds of technology, the different kinds of, Now we've spoken about the different kinds of energy systems, where we get the energy from, how we use it. Now we need to talk about centralization and decentralization. At the moment, we live in South Africa, and a lot of the world have got centralized systems. Somebody, usually the government, decide they're going to build a coal power station, or an oil power station, or a nuclear power station, and it's a very, very expensive operation. It's going to cost 100 billion rand. Nobody knows what that number means, including many of the parliamentarians, because I've spoken to them. My accountant doesn't know what 100 billion is, So the thing is that this is a centralized system, and in a centralized system what happens is, there was a reason for it. The reason was that the coal came out of the ground in Mpumalanga, Gauteng, Eastern Province, Eastern Transvaal. Okay, and so they put the power station there next to the coal mine. It made most sense to put the power station next to the coal mine. Then they put power lines in to bring the power to Cape Town, and then they had transformers to send the power up to a higher voltage, and then they had transformers to take the voltage down again. And there's about 10 to 15% loss in that. Okay, so we make 100 kilowatts in Joburg, and we get 90 kilowatts in Cape Town, besides all kinds of other losses. Okay. So the centralized, what was also happening before we built these big grids, okay, for example, is just over here outside our window, we had an oil farm, and we had an oil burning power station. And the story is that ladies' pantyhose used to get holes in it because of the pollution from the oil burning power station in Cape Town. And if you speak to any person over the age of 50, they can tell you that happened to them when they were in their teens and 20s. Okay, but that got closed a long time ago, and all the oil's been taken out, and now we've got a beautiful marina here. So also, as part of that centralization thing, we had power stations, for example, the power station in Pardon Island and the power station in Athlone, where they brought coal from the Transvaal in the old days to those power stations, and they burnt them locally. But those power stations were built before we had these huge transmission lines. So at some point they decided, no, it's too expensive to bring that coal to Cape Town, okay, so we'll just close those power stations and demolish them and use the space for other stuff, and then we will bring the electricity to Cape Town. But the visionaries, the people that built Cape Town, realized that we've got a problem in Cape Town, because what happens if the grid goes down from the north to the south? And therefore, because we don't have coal here, okay, and renewable energy was too expensive, Coburg was built. Okay, so Coburg made sense at the time. There were a lot of nuclear engineers. There were a lot of universities producing nuclear engineers. There were a lot of people making nuclear parts at the time. And so, 100 years after the second place in the world to make electricity was a place called Kimberley. Okay, because the guy sitting in Kimberley said, we've got lots of money and we want electricity, and they got electricity. So the second place in the world to get electricity was Kimberley, and 100 years later we got a nuclear power station on the African continent. And it made sense to have a nuclear power station, because you could send small amounts of nuclear energy, sealed in containers, brought by road or rail to Coburg, put into Coburg Power Station, and you only had to refuel the reactor every 18 months. So as long as you could make sure that the reactor was safe, okay, that you could shut it down and start it up quickly, that you had all the backup systems in place, then at that point, Coburg produced more than 100% of Cape Town's requirement. Now, 35 years later, Coburg is producing 40% of Cape Town's requirement. So 60% is coming from north. Hence, the Western Cape government, okay, and the national government are saying we need more nuclear power. But they're using thinking that's 50 years old. They're not really bringing on board all the other technologies I spoke about already. Okay? Because if they bring all those technologies on board, and they'll say, concentrated solar power with storage, okay, it's expensive, it's 60 rand a watt. Okay? But that price is coming down all the time. Nuclear power is going up all the time. And right at the moment, around now, we're at the point where CSP with storage is cheaper than nuclear. Now, it so happens, from that point of view, that Namibia is one of the world's top 3 sources of radiation points. It's low cloud cover, high radiation. It's called insulation. That's the main word, but people think about solar radiation, okay, or insulation, and that's in Namibia, and we should be putting concentrated solar plants in Namibia. Mm-hmm. Okay, making that energy, storing it in salt, and using it at peak time. Okay, we already have power lines going from Cape Town to Angola, so we have a power line there. It needs to be upgraded. We should build power lines to the new Waterberg power stations, we could see them at Dupi and so on. Those new power stations are being built there. And they're going to have 7 gigawatts of electricity being produced there, so they're building massive new power lines to Joburg. So taking a power line from Namibia to that point gives you 7 gigawatts of energy coming into the grid, potentially from Namibia. And Namibia's biggest export in 20 years' time could be electricity. Okay. So we think of Namibia, we think of diamonds, but imagine if Namibia said, well, diamonds was the 20th century technology, now our major export is electricity, because we've got the sun. So that of course requires capacity building, something we spoke about at this conference. Okay. The other side of the equation from a centralization point of view, and looking at the total Southern African grid, okay, is that there's possibly 7 gigawatts of pumped storage in the Lesotho Highlands. And I was lucky enough to sit next to the Minister of Energy of Lesotho in the conference. And I said to him, how much energy do you think we can make? And he said he thought maybe there's a gigawatt, of reasonably accessible pumped storage in the medium term. And he said, but we only need 120 megawatts. So they need 100 megawatts, but they can put a gigawatt in. So there's 900 megawatts of storage for South Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, etc., to pump water up. So as I said before, we can use excess energy. So when the wind turbines are blowing and the sun is pumping and the waves are doing their crashing and the rivers are full flood and we're producing excess energy, which we were selling at 150 kilowatt hour, but now we're saying to everybody, well, right at the moment we've got a huge surplus, we'll give it to you at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So the people, I know 3 people in Cape Town who've got kilns. They use 3-phase electricity, they use a lot of electricity so that they can do their pottery. Okay. Now, what they can do is they can put the timer on the kiln. Okay. They can say they need to run it for an hour and 20 minutes, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Okay. At this temperature, and they can press a button, and when there's excess energy, the power station will switch the kiln on. Okay. I am an IT expert. Okay. Doing this is not a problem. Okay. If you can send an SMS to a cell phone, you can turn the kiln on. Okay. So the kiln means that at the moment, when someone turns the kiln on, they're paying 150 kilowatt hour. Okay? If they happen to turn the kiln on at peak time, it's costing Eskom 15 rand a kilowatt hour. But Eskom's selling at 150 kilowatt hour. If they told Eskom or the city or a private power station, I need energy, switch my kiln on, then it could be costing 10 cents a kilowatt hour, just to keep the electricity flowing across the grid, because the marginal cost of the electricity is 0. We just have to get the electricity across the grid. Okay. So what happens is we move from the centralized system, and as I say, we can understand why nuclear was built, because transporting a very small amount of nuclear material from Palindaba to Koeberg power station made sense. Okay, and therefore we needed to have Koeberg. But we don't need to have Koeberg anymore. We need to find a way to shut Koeberg down as fast as possible and then put it in some kind of concrete container, which is not going to look all that nice, so that it can be there for 10,000 years and not pollute the environment. Okay. So then we get to that's centralization. Centralization means that we have a monopoly. The monopoly is called Eskom. Until the 1930s or 40s, we had maybe 100 people producing electricity in South Africa. Okay? Because everybody who needed electricity built their own power station, they all made electricity, and they all put it into the grid. Okay? And then at some point, the government said, okay, we can actually do this centrally cheaper. Okay? And therefore, they absorbed everything into Eskom with a law, and they said, okay, we're going to nationalize, in inverted commas, everybody's power stations, and then centralize the power grid. And so for 40 years, we had cheap electricity from Eskom, okay, because they centralized it, and we got economies of scale. Okay, the same with water. My grandmother in Cape Town had a house, and she collected her own rainwater. She had a rainwater tank. She had a septic tank and a French drain. She didn't have sewage. Her sewage was dealt with on site. She didn't have a very big house or plot. But that's how it was in the 1940s and 50s when you built your house. then the city came along and they said, okay, we can bring you water, cheaper. You don't have to worry about putting systems in place. We can take your sewage away cheaper. And so the economies of scale made sense to do that. But now the control and the monopoly and the centralization has got so big that those people have forgotten that their purpose is to make things cheaper for citizens, so citizens can go and do work, okay, and pay tax to pay their salaries. And now what they're doing is they're taxing the things like electricity and water and so on, which actually make the economy work. So if we overtax electricity, our economy is not going to work. Okay, so decentralization on the other side says, well, I'm a homeowner, okay, and I'm paying 150 a kilowatt hour for electricity, say, okay, in the city of Cape Town, and I can put a photovoltaic system on my roof using net metering, which means I make excess electricity in the day, which I send into the grid, and at night I buy the electricity back from the grid, okay, and I can make it at 130 a kilowatt hour. So right now, I can save between 15 and 30% of my cost immediately by putting a system on my roof. The nice thing about that is, let's suppose the system is going to cost me 200,000 Rand. Sounds like a lot of money, but I've got a bond in my house. So I bought my house. I didn't have R1 million to buy my house. So I got a bond from the bank, and I'm paying the bank over 20 years. Okay? So what I can do is, I can go to the bank and say, bank, I need a 200,000 Rand system, or 100,000 Rand system, whatever I need. Okay? And the bank can lend me the money, add it to my bond. Okay? And the bank has got 100% surety and security on the equipment that they're putting on my house. Okay? And so if I default, they can take my house and they can take the equipment. Okay. Plus, the bank has got security in knowing I was paying 2,000 Rand a month for my electricity, and I'm now paying 1,500 Rand for my electricity. So I've got 500 Rand of spare change, and the bank can say to me, well, what we'll do is we want you to put that 500 Rand into your bond to pay your bond faster. So you're still going to pay. So what happens is you take your electricity when you pay it to the bank. Okay. So you were paying 2,000 Rand per month for electricity. You pay the 2,000 Rand a month to the bank. It's costing 1,500 Rand, and the bank's taking 500 Rand a month, and they're using it to pay your bond down faster. Okay? So now, and that's giving you security, because let's suppose you get fired or made redundant, or you get sick, and you can't work for 3 months, you've got a reserve in your bond. So you're not going to lose your house when you suddenly get sick, you've got insurance. Okay? So that gives you that security on the house. It also makes your house more valuable, because now you've got electricity in your house. Okay? And so you're more sustainable. And people want to buy sustainable. Okay, so also it's a 200,000 Rand project, and it takes a week to install. If you build 100 billion Rand power station, okay, 200,000 times 1,000 is 200 million, times 1,000 is 200 billion. Okay, that's 2 of these big coal power stations. If you build those, they take 10 years to build. Okay, so, and we think they're going to cost. They were budgeted to cost 80 billion. They're now budgeted to cost 125 billion. Okay, and so we're at the point of saying, well, how far are these projects? We don't actually know how far they are. They were meant to be finished. The first phases of them were meant to come on stream 18 months ago. Okay, so we're building this huge project. It's costing a fortune. We don't know how far it is. We don't know what it's going to cost. We know it's costing more than it was meant to cost, and we've got some severe problems with these power stations that we weren't expecting to have. So from an engineering, from a science, from an IT point of view, from a water management point of view, from a getting the coal to the right place point of view, from a conveyor belt point of view, we've got all kinds of problems with these big power stations. Okay, and from a corruption point of view, we don't know that when someone says, I need R1 million to fix this problem, is it really R1 million? Because maybe it's only 100,000 Rand, and 900,000 Rand is going into the guy's pocket. But because the project is so big, we don't actually know, okay, how much money is actually being spent on equipment, and how much money is being spent on salaries and other corruption or bribes or commission or whatever. But when you put a system in a house for 200,000 Rand, okay, and it's going to take a week, if it takes 6 days, working days, you're already 20% behind schedule. So the day after after 5 days, you're behind schedule. So, and you need 3 people to do that. And you've got the electrician, you've got the person that puts the frames on the roof, and you've got the labourer. So you've got all these people employed. So, and then what you can do is you can take your one house, and you can make it 10 houses, 100 houses, 1,000 houses, 10 million houses. So when you get to 5 million houses, 5 million houses at 200,000 Rand each is 1 trillion Rand. So the 1 trillion Rand is the amount of money that the government wants to spend on nuclear power, okay, which is going to give us, let's say, 10 gigawatts of electricity. Okay, when the 10 gigawatts gets to our houses because of losses and spare capacity requirements and so on, it's actually about 7.5 gigawatts. If you take the same 1 trillion and you invest it in renewable energy, okay, then you can get 15 gigawatts. Okay, and if you do, so you're getting twice as much effective energy at the home. Okay, assuming the home is in Cape Town and the power station is in Joburg, or vice versa, the power station is in Cape Town, the home is in Joburg. Okay, if we're exporting across the grid. So instead of getting 1 trillion, giving us 7.5 gigawatts of effective electricity at the client site, as opposed to the power station, we're spending the money getting 15 gigawatts. If we then save 50% of our electricity requirement because of energy efficiency, which is something I need to still discuss in more detail, then we're actually getting effectively 30 gigawatts of energy from a 1 trillion rand investment. So whereas in 1960, it would have cost us, say, 100 trillion in today's money to do what I'm suggesting, because of price coming down, capability going up, etc. We're now at the point where we can take the trillion, instead of getting 10 gigawatts of nuclear, we can get 30 gigawatts of private homeowner. And now we get the story, well, we get to think, oh, but it's not baseload. So baseload is this funny concept where a company says, I'm a smelter, okay, which means I need, say, a gigawatt to run my smelter, okay, or I'm a waterfront and I need, say, 10 or 15 or 20 megawatts. I'm not sure how much they use, but they certainly use 10, 20, 30 megawatts of electricity to run this place, okay. Or I'm a big company like Old Mutual, also using many megawatts, okay, etc. I need baseload. I need to run my computers, okay. If I happen to be Google, okay, I need 150 megawatts to run my building. So just Google's building, okay, in San Francisco in California, they need 150 megawatts to run that building because it's just full of computers, okay. So, and computers need electricity, okay. So we need 150 megawatts. It's a lot of energy. Okay, so but we can get it now from the sun, the wind, battery power, all kinds of things. So the system means the nice thing about a decentralized system, okay, is there's very little chance of corruption. There's very big chance of finishing on time. Okay, there's a very big chance of having the homeowner involved in the equation, so the homeowner can get to understand what's going on. Okay, every suburb will have specialist electricians, specialist DC electricians, specialist installers, specialist maintenance people, inspectors, distribution agents, people selling product, etc. So you are resourcing your local economy. Now, you don't have to make solar panels in South Africa to get that resource. Okay, so this is another topic which is called localization. So we've dealt with centralization and decentralization, and we've seen that with a decentralized system, we have the opportunity to ensure that our costs are covered. And actually, for the home I was talking about, with 200,000 Rand, we can also put a battery bank included in that price. So that battery bank means it's not going to run your oven, and it's not going to run your geyser, and it's not going to run your underfloor heating, because those are things that use a lot of electricity. But what it's going to do is it's going to run your computers, preferably laptops, which use less electricity than desktop computers, and are the same price. A laptop computer today costs the same as a desktop computer cost 5 years ago, and does a lot more. Okay, it's going to run your lights, it's going to run your TV, it's going to run your radio, it's going to open your garage door. If you're lucky enough to have a gate, it's going to open your gate. It's going to do all that stuff with your battery. That's what the battery. It's going to run your fridge. That's what the battery bank is for. Okay, so it means that effectively you can remove your house from the grid at a moment's notice. Okay, use your battery bank, and then the grid can have your electricity. So we have 10 million homeowners. We're not going to get there tomorrow, but we could have 100 tomorrow. We could have 10,000 in 3 months' time. We could have 1 million by the end of next year. You know, because this is rapid expansion. This is the internet age. This is the age of exponential growth. You know, so let's take the exponential growth, you know, and put it in electricity and say, well, how can we make jobs? So now we get to localization. There's different aspects of localization. One of the things that I did think about was product localization. Okay, and I thought about, but there's bigger stories to localization, which we discussed at this conference. Okay, there was a Powering Africa conference in the last 2 days. So if we say that we want to localize the manufacturing, okay, then that means we want to make the cell phones in South Africa. But now, how many cell phone companies are there making cell phones in South Africa? I don't think there are any. Okay, so now we're buying cell phones from China, from America, from Australia, from wherever they're made. Indonesia, other places where cell phones are made, and the technologies are made in those countries, and we're importing them. We don't have any problem with that. Okay. On the other side, we want to build a nuclear power station. We're going to import most of the material to buy the power station in terms of special kinds of valves, which are, there's only one factory in the world that makes those valves, and there's an 18-month waiting list. So when you buy a valve, you've got to buy two. Okay? Because if your valve breaks, okay, and you don't have a backup, so let's suppose the valve is designed to last 20 years, okay, and you've got a spare, okay, because just in case it breaks, and it breaks, and the new one's faulty, your power station's off for 18 months. Okay? There used to be 3 factories making that valve, now there's only 1 factory. So that's one of the problems with capacity in the nuclear industry. Amory Lovins wrote a very good paper. It's quite heavy reading, it's 50 pages. It's very worthwhile reading. Amory Lovins is an energy researcher in America, and he's a very, very well-known guy. And there's lots of videos on TED and YouTube. Just look for his name, Amory Lovins, and watch what he says about the nuclear industry, about renewable energy, and so on. And then consider that 30 years ago, there were many universities producing nuclear engineers. Now there are few universities producing nuclear engineers.
Yeah.
Many years ago, there were lots of nuclear engineers. Now there are few nuclear engineers.
Yeah.
So whilst we want to expand our nuclear capacity,
Yes.
we're going to need nuclear engineers.
Yeah.
But there aren't that many nuclear engineers. So if there's a shortage of nuclear engineers, guess what? 10 million rand a year salary, please. Because I don't want to move from France to crime-infested South Africa. Because that's there. I mean, I don't think I live in crime-infested South Africa because I live here. And I know what it's like. But if I'm a nuclear engineer with a cushy job in some nuclear plant in the south of France, and I can go swimming in Antibes every weekend and sail my yacht in the Mediterranean, okay, then I don't really want to come to South Africa. Okay? And if it's going to take 20 years to train up the nuclear engineers we need, then that guy's going to say, look, I'm earning £100,000 in London, which is 1.7 million rand. If you're going to come to South Africa, you've got to pay me 17 million rand. Okay? So we've got a problem. Okay? So localizing says we want to make photovoltaic panels in South Africa, we want to make inverters in South Africa.